Women make up nearly 50% of all gamers, yet only a small percentage of women play esports professionally. It's time we figure out how to change that. The Knights want to empower women to build their esports empire. Along with our partner PNC Bank, we are adamant about creating a more equitable future for gamers. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, so we'll be tackling the issue from all angles, featuring insights from a variety of subject matter experts and professionals. I'm Kat DeShields-Moon with the Knights. Welcome to the Women in Esports podcast.
Hi, I'm Nikki Clark, and welcome to a special edition of Women in Esports, sponsored by PNC Bank. And today we are crossing over with Women in Motorsports here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So today we are here, I'm Nikki Clark, and we are here with two female teams, and they may be doing different things, but they have one thing in common. We're trying to grow the industry and grow jobs for women. And so we have some women from Chip Ganassi Racing, and over here we have from the Pittsburgh Knights. They are an e-gaming women's team, and I want everybody to introduce themselves and tell me what you do in your sport. Because I've just learned e-gaming. We're both learning, and you're learning motorsports, and so we're all learning about each other. So tell us your name and what you do.
My name is Zoella. I am a Rocket League player for the Pittsburgh Knights women's team, and I just play competitive gaming for them.
Awesome. My name is Valerie, and I'm the assistant GM of the esports division of Pittsburgh Knights. So I work with all our players and content creators and the rest of our team in the esports division to, empower women in gaming and the rest of our teams.
And we were talking a little bit earlier, too. You do more than this. I mean, there are so many more jobs we're going to get into in e-gaming that you may not know about. And Valerie here, she's going to tell you how many jobs that she does. She's all over the place. And over here at Chip Ganassi Racing, I've met. Tell us what your name is, what you do.
Yep. Hi, I'm Anna Chatton, and I am the gearbox mechanic on the number 48 car for Chip Ganassi Racing.
And tell us a little bit real quick what your job is.
Yeah, so when we were in the race shop, I build and prepare and set up the gearbox to go to the racetrack. And then when we get to the racetrack, I change gears as per the engineer's direction to the right of me.
Yeah. So then that flows right into the next guest.
Great segue. I'm Angela Ashmore, and I'm the assistant engineer on the number 8 Chip Ganassi Racing Honda. And basically what that means is I look after the electronics on the car, all the data system, and during the race I do fuel strategy and try not to run us out of fuel.
That's a good one. That's very important.
Yes, important, especially here.
Yeah, I'm Danielle Shepard. I'm the lead engineer on the O2 Chip Ganassi Cadillac Racing DPI, and I'm also here for the month of May helping on the one car as an engineer.
Because as you'll notice where we are at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and it is the month of May. It's the day before the Indy 500. You can probably hear once in a while some race cars outside. Like I said, you guys do two different things, but you have the same problems and everything. PNC is a sponsor of this, and they have something called Project 257. Basically, they're saying if we go at the same rate we are right now, it's going to be 257 years before women face equality in the workforce, pay equality. And so they're helping out and sponsoring both these teams so that we can help bring more women into the workplace. And so let's get into what we were talking about before. Esports, it's more than just gaming. There's so much more. And I was talking to you the other night, Zoella, too. You do content, you do playing, you do everything. So tell me a little bit more besides actual playing, what your job involves.
So through the Knights, I both play competitive gaming, and then I also will create content. For me, that looks like I will do a live stream, which is basically it's just like watching your sports on TV, except the difference is I can interact with the people watching in real time. So they can type in a chat box, and I can read their messages, and if they have questions, I can answer them. And they also get to see it from my perspective rather than getting to see it from a third-person POV, which is, again, another kind of unique thing in comparison to real sports. And then outside of the Knights, I also do graphic design and work production teams for a variety of different things within the Rocket League world, which largely looks like me updating graphics, helping make announcement posts, things like that.
So, and then we'll go to Valerie next because, like I said, we're talking, you and me, we're jack of all trades at our jobs. So besides doing what you're talking about, the GM, what else do you do for the Pittsburgh Knights?
So with the Knights, I primarily work with all our teams and content creators. What that means is just day-to-day management. That also means scouting, like scouting talent. So, we're in 9 different esports titles, so essentially you can think of that as like 9 different sports teams. So in each of these titles, it's different team members, and team members get swapped out, bench, whatever. I help along with that. And alongside that, I also help a lot with the partnership and marketing team. So for example, on this trip, I got to work with my players and content creators and kind of bridge the gap between sports world and esports world. So I get to work alongside with partnership and marketing on larger scale events like that too.
Good. And then being a woman, did you find it was harder to get into this job and in these positions? Do you find it was harder being a woman?
Definitely. Before I worked at Knights, I actually worked in broadcast and production for large-scale events. So it would be like events that are, I guess, the esports equivalent of the Indy 500. So in production is not kind to women, unfortunately. There's a lot of barriers of entry. And production includes like directors, audio engineers, like replay operators, observers, and like camera operators, all that such. Just like in any other normal stage show. But in production, that's where I first started. And production, it was definitely difficult to work as a woman. In the teams I worked, we would have like teams about like 40 people for a show, and I would be one of 2 women that would work the show.
Wow.
Yeah, and so definitely not as accessible for women. And I think the greatest issue is because things like production is not an accessible resource for people to learn. It's not something you exactly go to school to learn, and to top it off as a woman, you can't really go to anyone to learn it. But in recent years, and Zoella can speak about this too, in recent years it's been really great, the women community of esports. We've been kind of, all the observers, producers, all the people that I've worked in production before, they're teaching emerging women in esports under like mentorships and just showing them the ropes and everything, and just empowering each other. So in recent years, production has been much, much greater. And Zoella can even speak on that, because in Rocket League, there's like women-led teams and some completely women-made teams in Rocket League production.
Gotcha. Anything to add to that, Zoella?
Yeah, so something that I see a lot in the Rocket League world is a lot of this stuff is done on Twitter. We'll see a different person every few weeks or so, it feels like, make a post like, hey, if anybody wants to learn how to cast, which is like commentary, they'll just make a tweet like, hey, if you want to learn this, I'm going to be teaching some women how to do this to help grow the number of women in the field. And it's just, that can be for the commentators, the people that are working behind the scenes on the graphic production, whatever it may be, whatever that person is qualified to help somebody learn, they're willing to help learn so that women can grow in general.
Girls got to stick together.
Yep.
Like we got to help each other.
Yeah.
And now I'll take it over to our motorsports side here. And I've spoken with Anna before too, and we're not telling ages, but you've been doing this for 20 plus years. And what changes have you seen for women's roles in motorsports since you first started?
Yeah, I think a lot has changed in the 20 plus years I've been doing this. When I first got in the business, I feel like I repeat this a lot, but I just kind of wanted to blend in. I didn't really want to stand out as a female. I wanted to learn my skill and do my job. Now I feel like the shift is starting to happen, that equality is much more celebrated and diversity is a lot more accepted than it used to be in the motorsports paddock, for sure. So, I mean, it's definitely changed significantly, I would say, in the last 10 years, for sure.
Really? And same question for you, Angela. What have you seen since you've started? You're on the engineering side. What have you seen?
Yeah, I haven't been around quite as long, but even in my short time, it's been remarkable, the difference year over year, how many women there are. we take a women of the Indy 500 photo every year, and it's really interesting to see the progression.
It used to be like 2.
Yeah, it was
and
like
now it's probably
it was like you and Kara, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's in the upwards of probably 20-ish, I would say, by now.
Last year we
So-
had 2 photos because there were too many for one. So it was
Okay, that's awesome.
yeah. It's grown every year, and I think especially in the IndyCar paddock, I kind of have maybe a unique perspective of having participated in 2 separate series. I came from NASCAR and I came into IndyCar a few years ago, and just the difference in numbers and the general feeling of how welcome I am and how how normal it is for to be women around is a lot different in IndyCar. I think that it's not as big of a deal here, and a few years ago that was not the case. So there's been big changes recently.
I love it. And now, Danielle, like you're in endurance racing, I'm sorry?
Yeah, IMSA side.
On the IMSA
Yeah.
side, what is it like over there for the women? Is it same thing where you haven't seen many and it's grown, or?
So this is actually my first year there, so I can't really comment on how many and the changes there. But having been in the IndyCar paddock, I mean, I can echo what Angela said. Even just in the past few years, even being here, just the number of women that you see up and down pit lane has grown quite a bit, and each year you see other women trying to get in, and you see trying to get into the sport and all the motivation there. So there really has been a growth in the number of women, like when you walk up and down pit lane year over year.
Well, and then that brings us to the next part is what did you do to get your job? Because everybody has unique abilities and you want to learn to get a job. So what is your background over to the esports side? What was your background to get the jobs that you have now? What did you study? And
I'll go first. So I started playing my game, which is Rocket League, pretty shortly after it came out, about 6 years ago. And then in the past year and a half, I started taking it more seriously and getting into the competitive scene. And the nice thing about the women's scene in particular is it's a really young scene. I think the league only started in 2020.
Okay.
So it's very accessible to get into at the beginning. So while it may be challenging to reach the top of that level, you can get in at a lower level and start to make some connections within the league, and you can really grow from learning from those other players because it's a league where everybody is willing to teach each other stuff. One of the best players in the league has been my individual coach for the past year now. So it's a really nice thing to be able to see that progression from inside the league rather than having to look outside the league for more talent. But yeah, I found a couple of teams that were just like temporary teams to try and play in some tournaments to get a little bit of experience under my belt and get my name out there some more. And then I started looking for a more permanent team. And once we had kind of settled on who it's a 3-person team. Once we settled on our 3, we were like, okay, let's get some awards under our name. Played some tournaments to get some results that we could bring forward with us to go to an org and be like, hey, this is what we have done so far. Would you be interested in having us represent your organization in the women's scene?
And Valerie, what did you do? You said you had a production background.
Yeah. I did go to I'm from Canada, but I did go to college. But I'm going to say right now, what I learned in college was not very relevant to my field. How I started working in this industry is really I hosted my own events. I created my own company and hosted my own events. And oftentimes you're going to hear a very similar story for many people in esports because esports is a very self-made passion-turned career, right? So I hosted events kind of just out of passion, and then from hosting events, my events eventually got bigger and bigger, and I met more people and just more opportunities, and I also worked at Microsoft for a little bit, and from there I got the opportunity to work in production as well. And then after working in production for a bit, I really wanted to stabilize, I guess, my career, because the thing with production, there's a lot of opportunities out there for women and people in general for production, but production is still kind of contractor work, right? It's event based. It's 1 month you might get 10 events and 1 you might get 0. So After production, I wanted to work for an organization, and I came upon Knights, and Knights has been great. I've gotten so many opportunities for growth here, and like, for example, like I talked about earlier, like partnerships and marketing, that's not something I learned in school nor really ever thought about doing in general. So Knights has been great, and I've just been, having a blast here, kind of, because we also do events here, so I get to use my event and production experience in that field, and then I get to work with the players, which is what I love doing, and then I get to work on content and be creative with the team. So that's kind of how I started and where I ended up here.
I just gotta say, I'm so super impressed. The fact that you're like, I'll do my own then. So you're just like, okay, I'm gonna host events. Like
But that's the thing in esports. That's very common, especially the women in esports. It's a very self-made thing, especially for women, because women, I feel like sometimes they start behind the start line. Some people get head starts, and unfortunately, that's not women. So we kind of have to put forth that extra effort to, get exposure or to kind of prove yourselves. Like Zoella, same thing. Like she's self-taught with all her design. That's not something she went to school for. She taught all that herself, and she learned all that on her own. And same with any of her production skills, right? So it's a very self-made environment for women in gaming.
I love that, and I'm the same way. I worked in television. And you go to school, but you're like, you did not learn this in school. You get into a newsroom, you get into that's stuff I was never going to learn in school. And so that's why I think internships and having mentors is such a huge help for women trying to evolve and move up in sports. And same thing, we're going to come to this side too, because, people ask, it's like, well, just start working on a car and you just kind of, but there's so much more to that you get to learn. So I'm going to ask you ladies over here too, it's like, what background you had that led you up to IndyCar?
Yeah. So I grew up around motor racing. My dad was my first interest in motor racing, like most people I think that are involved in the business. And I grew up racing go-karts with him. I was in high school, and I did a co-op program in high school the last 2 years. And I think the best thing I learned from that was I wanted to have a job I loved doing. And I loved being in motorsports, so I actually moved to California from the Midwest, and I went to a mechanics training program. It was kind of like an internship. It was a racing school, so they had racing school cars, and it was geared towards mechanical aspect of race cars specifically. And so I did that for a year. I made a couple contacts, and I got my first job on a sports car team. And I really wanted to be in open wheel racing, so I only did the sports car thing for like a couple years, and then I worked for another racing school series that used to be a support series to the then Champ Car IndyCar series, and I basically worked my way up through the ranks, much like other professional sports work. I worked on lower level cars until I got my first opportunity on a big car, and never looked back since.
When you were in this mechanical school, were you the only girl? Were there other girls? I mean, was it?
Oh yeah, I was the only girl. I was the only girl for some time. Probably maybe by like 2004-ish, there was another female mechanic that worked in the paddock as well, and her and myself were probably it for probably till 2010. So
wow.
Yeah.
As a girl. And now, how did you find your job? Like, what education, what roles did you go through?
So I wanted to be in racing from the time I was 4 or 5 years old. That's all I ever wanted to do.
It.
So I knew that was my path, or I knew that's where I wanted to end up. I didn't necessarily have a clear path to get there. In high school, I started volunteering with like late model teams, and I got involved with this electrothon program in my high school, and then I chose to go down the engineering path because I was really good at math and enjoyed it, and I was really good at science and I enjoyed it. So I kind of took what I was skilled at and found a path to use those skills in a way that allowed me to work in a field that I enjoyed. So I settled in engineering because it was applicable to motor racing, and that's where I wanted to be. So I went to Purdue, got my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. I volunteered with late model teams to get some experience, try and get a foot in the door. I did Formula SAE and another program called Opportunity Motorsports. I was working with late models, kind of like the same thing where you're working with lower level motorsports just to show that you have an interest and get some exposure get your hands dirty a little bit. And out of college, I wanted to go into motorsports, but I couldn't find an opportunity to do that. So I found a great opportunity, and I went and worked for Chrysler, and I was there for 4.5 years. And I got to work on some really cool programs there, but it wasn't motorsports, and that wasn't really where my passion was. So I think that was kind of one of the things, like, when I got my first opportunity, and I just took the first one I could, the only one I found, and went into NASCAR, was, a lot of the people around me were, it was all males, really. And a lot of them were, oh, my dad's in racing, my dad works for this team, my brother works for this team. It was like this total boys club of like,
Oh, yeah.
95% of the people there were people who grew up in that environment. They were like born, bred, and raised to be mechanics, be engineers, be, crew chiefs
Oh, yes.
on these
I
cars.
that on my racing
And
side,
I
too,
came
yeah.
in and I was like, my parents didn't work in racing. Like, my family doesn't do this. Like, we watched on TV on the weekends, and I was just a fan. So it was kind of a culture shock, and I feel really lucky to have even found an opportunity to get my foot in the door. And then once I got in, then it was easier to move around.
It's extremely hard to find an opportunity in motor racing, even if you're male. So being female,
Yes.
that adds another challenge to it.
I was gonna say.
It's hard to get in your foot door regardless of your gender, and then being female makes it even a little more complicated.
Yeah.
Well, and we'll come back to that too, but we'll go next to Daniela. And how'd you get into your
Yeah,
career pursuit?
so I started off as a fan too, and I picked a college because I thought I wanted to do foreign language and foreign policy. Yeah, so like 2 weeks in, I was like, political science is not for me. Well, and like in my spare time, I was taking math classes too, so I was like, okay, I'll just go down the math physics path instead of the foreign language path. So I was like, well, if I'm not going to do foreign policy, I should go do motorsports because it's the thing that's directly next to it. So yeah, I just decided, I was like, okay, well, I hate this, and let's go do racing instead. So yeah, I told my math professor that I wanted to do motorsports engineering, and he actually helped me find an opportunity to do an internship with Professor Davidson College, who was doing math research in NASCAR. So I was able to do that internship, and then also through that program, I actually met, so I went to the College of Worcester, and I met an alum from Worcester who was working actually in the racing business. So I was able to make that networking connection, and he's also doing engineering stuff too. So he was actually able to help me get my first position with an IndyCar team.
Well, I just want to point out, really funny, my parents are in racing, they've had race cars, everything. They had absolutely zero help in me getting, when I left TV and decided I want to work in motorsports marketing, zero help. They're like, they're like, we don't really want you to do that. I'm like, no, I'm going to do it. They didn't help me at all. So I was pretty proud of that. But, so let's go back to the engineering. The thing you guys talk about engineering, it gives you so many more opportunities that people don't realize in racing. I think people think that it's just, like grease monkey, work in a car. And you guys play such an important part. And getting that foot in the door.
Yeah, I think it's I actually think it's one of the sides of racing that isn't necessarily broadcast. I mean, it sounds really weird. Like, I decided in college I wanted to do motorsports engineering, but I didn't really know what that meant.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you knew what it meant, but I didn't really know what I thought I wanted to do. I just thought race cars were cool, and I wanted to go be a part of it, but I didn't necessarily know what I was even wanting to be a part of. I just liked math and cars. And I mean, sure, if I had decided partway through I didn't want to do race cars, there's other aero opportunities. You could have gone and worked on spaceships or worked on airplanes. Like, there's so many different opportunities in engineering itself. But yeah, I came up with, and I feel like they kind of don't show the public necessarily what we do either.
I think it's so hard to describe because, like, even when somebody asks me what I do, I have difficulty explaining it because it's not just one thing. I do so many different things, and like, I have new problems that pop up every day, and my job is just like
You're just a problem solver who works on a race car.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. And Another thing too is, so PNC, who we're familiar with you guys, I love it. They've now started internship and mentorship program.
Yeah.
And so they're bringing in girls and giving out scholarships. What's it like to be a part of that, knowing that you guys are going to help other women move up in the sport and get jobs in the sport?
Yeah, it's super cool to be a part of it. I feel like for me personally, I've been doing this a while, and I've never really had the formal opportunity to give back to anybody coming in behind me, and that's super important. My job especially, there isn't, as you guys spoke about, there isn't any really formal training for that. You're only as good as the person that works next to you, and you have to learn from the people that have come before you. So being a female, that's a lot harder to accomplish when everyone you're learning from is male. So we have a great, unique opportunity to change that up a little bit, and it's super exciting to be part of it. I think for me, I have 2 daughters. They're 6 and 7. And if you would have asked me 20 years ago if we'd still be at the same progression we are now, I would have told you were crazy. I think that it should be much further along than it is, and this is a great opportunity for me directly, and Angela and Danielle and everybody else to participate in giving back to some of that. So, yeah, super cool.
And now you said you had mentors too, and do you personally have mentors also? Like, is there somebody you're working with to teach?
Not currently, but I've actually had a couple of people who've expressed some interest in having me kind of explain to them how to do graphic stuff specifically, because that's kind of, sure, you can go to school to learn graphic design, but you're not really learning how to apply that. One of the biggest things I struggled with when I was first getting into graphics is I knew I wanted to get into graphics with esports, but I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't know what kind of graphics I was going to be making, so it was a lot of just looking at what teams are posting, like, oh, they're making a post that looks like this when they win, or like, oh, they picked up a new team and this is what that looks like. So it's a lot of just researching, like, how do they structure those posts, and to be able to pass that on is something that I think I want to do at some point, but I'd like to get a little bit more experience under my belt before I do that. But then as a player, I've coached a couple of people that are like lower level players that are trying to come up and be able to be more competitive with some of the higher teams in the league. So I've always said to everyone in our league, if you ever need somebody to go over a replay with you or look over your games, I'm like, I am completely down. I may not be the best player in the league, but I am more than happy to go over stuff and help you point out stuff that you may have missed. Because I think no matter how good you are, either as the player or the coach, you can always it's good to get more perspectives, because they might see something that you don't think about, or you might learn something that you had never known before.
Valerie?
Yeah, I've definitely had a lot of people I've mentored in the past, but I actually want to talk about my mentors. In my previous company, like I said, it was male dominated, and even like you guys were talking about earlier how like you just learn from the person above you, and 99% of the time it's a male, and oftentimes there's friction in that relationship. It doesn't always go so well, and it's difficult. So in my previous work experience, I didn't have the greatest mentors, and that's why I mean when I talk about self-made, I learned a lot on my own. But at Knights here, my greatest thing at Knights here is that I have a lot of women mentors here. I think Knights is one of the first esports companies I've worked where there's diversity in the company, and the mentors I have here at Knights have like led me so well, like in the partnership team, in the marketing team, and in the esports team as well. So I just want to highlight that fact, because I think it's so important to have women not just in the lower levels of gaming and even just real sports, having them in the higher levels of management just makes sense, because you need that to trickle down. And as a result, like I've gotten the opportunity to mentor other women in Knights as well, and pass it on. Right?
That's what we're talking. That's
exactly.
of girls, and like you said, you were saying too, the little girls now need somebody to look up to and say, I can do that. Oh, she can do that. I can do that too. And that brings up another question we're talking about, is the environment, the work environment for women. And I keep going, Anna, just because we talked about that, but you're talking about how your team is your family. I mean, even the guys, the environment you work in, how supportive they are.
In motor racing, obviously, we spend a lot of time together. So, They're definitely like family. Some of them I like more than others, just like my real family. So, yeah, no, it's definitely the environment for me has changed quite a bit since I got in the business, and it is a lot different now in the respect that I'm starting to see like the younger generation come in, and it's very noticeable to me the change in that. Obviously, time changes everything, right? I would like it to change a little bit faster on this front, but it is for sure starting to be more relevant now. I see the younger generations come in, and being a female is less of an issue for them. So that's positive to see.
Yeah, but like it brings back what you're saying. You're more comfortable with the Knights because the positivity,
Right.
the
yeah.
positive
It's
environment.
the diversity. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so that brings us up. So we're creating all this positivity. Now there's some negativity out there and some pitfalls. What would you warn, so there's a girl who wants to get into esports. What would be something you tell her to avoid? Like, is there like, watch out for this kind of deal? What would be something for that?
I would say as a player, it's more difficult to avoid because you're going to have to play in competitive public lobbies. But the biggest thing I have learned is while you may not want to have your profile picture something other than yourself, you're better off to just do that and just hide your identity because you're going to get less toxicity. And while you might not be able to express yourself as much, it does give you an opportunity to be competitive and play in those lobbies still and be taken seriously because they're not going to judge you based on your gender. They're just going to be like, oh, it's just another random player. While they might not realize that they're playing with a woman, that might be for the best for you while you're trying to come up.
Yeah, that's definitely something that needs to be addressed in the gaming world. People like voice communication and in public lobbies and stuff like that. But my advice for women in gaming or looking to get into gaming is it doesn't happen overnight. This is something Zoel and I were talking about before too. It's not something that happens overnight, but it is worth it in the end. Especially in the most recent 2 years. Like I worked in the production company maybe about 4 years ago. Like I was one of the 2 women, and the only time we would get women is when I was leading the project as project manager, and I would choose to hire women, right? But in the most recent years, I've seen production teams of completely women-led, full women production teams running women esports leagues. For example, like at Knights, we run completely like women-exclusive events. And tournaments, and the opportunities in the last recent 2 years have just like rose so much. There's so many more opportunities out there, and I think now is such a great time to get into, especially with all the existing women leaders in gaming that are kind of passing on their information and their knowledge to the next generation and bringing people under their wing and teaching them whether it's production or casting or content creation. Just like in racing, there's a million jobs in gaming, right? It's not just playing the game or managing the people that play the game. There's so many other ways to do it, and now is just the greatest time to do it because there's so many opportunities out there right now.
Yeah, and I didn't even think about it when I was talking to another friend. I'm like, besides the gaming part, I didn't even think about people in accounting. There's somebody who's got to handle the money part. I mean,
Exactly.
you guys have great money prizes for tournaments. There's somebody to do that. There's somebody when you do live events to handle the ticketing. There's the marketing.
Exactly.
I mean, there's so many roles in esports I didn't even think about until I was looking. I'm like, well, yeah, I guess somebody has to do that too.
Exactly.
And where would be the first place for them to start if they wanted to get into like maybe a behind the scenes role if they weren't a gamer? Where would it be the first place for them to go?
I think a lot of organizations right now, especially with summer coming up, there's a lot of intern positions opening, and with events booming right now, there's a lot of, with the transition of the last 2 years, what happened, a lot of in-person events have transitioned to online. So there's hundreds and hundreds of opportunities out there. Even with Knights, whenever we run an event, we probably run 3+ broadcasts with it. So what that means is each broadcast needs a team, and a team needs a director, a camera operator, someone casting the games, right? So in just a single broadcast, that's probably like about 6 roles and 6 opportunities right there. So opportunities are everywhere right now, and The best way to look for it is honestly Twitter. Twitter's kind of the LinkedIn for esports.
I did not know that.
But yeah, opportunities are all over there right now, and there's a lot of like volunteer positions, intern positions, and even just paid opportunities for entry level for women in gaming.
And then, like I said, we'll turn it to, and like I said, you both work with cars, just your cars play soccer and yours are on the racetrack. Same thing, what would be the, kind of like the do's and don'ts of getting into racing right now? What would be like your, hey, make sure to do this and don't do this for a woman trying to get a job right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from the mechanic end of it. For sure, I don't think there's any don'ts.
Good.
I really don't. It's, apply. Go take a resume to a race team. You don't need experience. I mean, there's entry-level positions. We hire entry-level people all the time. You work hard and work your way up. There really isn't anything, especially gender-wise, that should hold you back on that. There is a ton of motorsports is thriving right now, and there's a ton of opportunities in motorsports out there for sure.
And what would be your advice? Either.
I can, yeah. I think it's just like if once you get an opportunity, it's just show up and do your job well. I feel like racing is a job that just respects people who do their job well. Like you just want people who are there and committed to doing the work. And I feel like at this point, it doesn't matter if you're female or male. It just matters that you're there and putting in the effort and doing your job and doing what needs to be done. And that's way more important at this point than what gender you are.
Yeah. I think the trick is getting the foot in the door, like finding the opportunity to even get started. And Chip always has this thing that he says, don't beat yourself. Like don't decide that you don't have the job before you've even applied. Like put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to just apply for the job. Like the worst thing that happens is you get turned down, you get told no. You have to take a risk.
My boss calls it self-editing.
Yeah, yeah. Like, the worst thing you could do is decide that you failed before you even tried. So I think that there's more opportunities and more opportunities to succeed than people realize.
And that's the thing too, is you guys, same thing with esports, is how many behind the scenes roles. So you're not like me, not a math person. I mean, but there's PR roles, there's marketing roles, heck, there's even, when I work with an HR side, you got the people who have to run the hospitality. There's you got to have an organization person, who will get everything and make sure you guys are, doing everything.
I mean, we've got, a fitness program. We've got IT people. There are, engineers that just do research and development work. There's accountants. There's finance people. There's people who do, obviously like media relations, but then there's also the marketing side of things who work almost, totally behind the scenes that are finding all these sponsors for us that support everything we do day in and day out. I mean, there's a million roles that you could have. There's machinists and fabricators and people who don't normally go to the track that are still integral to our everyday operations.
I think it's more.
I think one of the things to mention is too, our partnership with PNC and the Women's Motorsports Initiative. We're kind of pioneering that, but I think you'll see other people follow suit. I mean, there's kind of some other programs that are starting up too. We're just the first, and I think that there'll be a lot more. And once people see how successful that is and realize that the talent pool they can pull from as far as females being exposed, maybe things they didn't know, opportunities they didn't know existed. So I feel like in the future there's going to be a lot more pathways to get your foot in the door for sure.
Yeah, I think I was
going to say, I think Anna's right. I think the way that you promote growth in the series is to just give women opportunities, give them an opportunity for a position they may not have even know was there. Like, they, like you said, we're going to put women in a race team in positions that maybe women don't necessarily usually have or aren't necessarily the primary candidate for, but it's how many people know that we have a female intern in IT? How many people even know that there's an IT side of racing? There's a lot of opportunity in racing that isn't necessarily even known. So I think the way you promote growth is just to promote opportunity.
I love that. And so I think it'd be fun right now too. Do you guys have any questions for these ladies? Now that we're all learning about each other, what each other do you have any questions for these ladies on this side?
Let's see.
Because like I said, I love coming the two sides. Like, I didn't know, I talked to these girls the other night. Do you know, watching one of their events, they have, you were telling me, one event, they have 100,000 people
That's crazy.
will watch an event. How many people come here?
Oh no, a lot of people come here.
Yeah. I think they said
But-
350,000 for tomorrow.
Yeah.
I had no idea that the gaming, I mean, obviously generationally that was not my thing. I mentioned I have kids now, so I'm getting a little insight into that. I mean, I had no idea that any of that even existed. So it's super cool, and I love how you guys are basically self-made. I mean, that's awesome. You know, in our business, wouldn't quite work the same. You definitely have to have more support behind you, but the initiative it takes to do that is super cool. So cheers to that.
Thank you. Yeah, hearing all your stories was great too. Like I like the self-made story of like, you know, no family, I guess, history of racing and even going to like school, and it's just, you know, all men. And I love hearing those stories too. And your stories are all pretty much self-made too, so don't count yourselves out with that one. Let's see. For racing, I guess for all the different jobs, because even you mentioned the IT part, I didn't even think about that. So what are, I guess, the not as well-known jobs in racing that are opportunities out there?
There's a ton.
Probably.
I feel like one of the things that I would love to see happen in motor racing that I think a female would just rock at is, you know, we have team managers, right? Mm-hmm. And so basically they oversee the team, and, you know, organizationally on that level, I mean, they do a lot of daily functions, but I don't think that we've, at least on the IndyCar paddock, had a female team manager, and I think it's about time we do. So I'd like to see that happen. It's definitely not in my realm of spectrum, but I mean, for sure it would be for somebody. So
I volunteer as tribute.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's a role I think a female would definitely excel at. Some of the less traditional ones, like Angela mentioned, you know, we have a training program at Ganassi for Pitstop stuff, and you know, that's something I think maybe the outside world doesn't recognize we do. Obviously IT, because you guys mentioned that. What are some of the other roles? Hospitality, I think that's something too that people kind of oversee. That's a big part of what we do. So
Yeah, they got to be a host. They got, you know, you have all your sponsors coming in, and they're the face of you guys, making everybody, you know,
I
make
know.
you look good.
I thought of another one. There we go. Yeah. So you guys mentioned like graphic design. So I think most people, maybe the average person doesn't realize we don't actually paint our race cars anymore. So they're actually all wrapped in vinyl. And so graphic design is a huge thing in our business as well. So
And also, I think like graphic design and like just artistry is like traditionally very female, and it's crazy to me that in motorsports where you're designing these liveries for these cars, like I don't know that there's many women that do this.
I think there's one. I think there's one at Ray Hall. Wow. But
like
there's very few.
It's definitely not a like publicized career path. It's not something you immediately think of when you think of motorsports, but it's so important because like that's the main piece of media that people see. Yeah, like that. It's the car, and that's the
product
thing
we put out.
Yeah.
So.
The other side of it too is the truck drivers.
Yeah.
The only
There
way
you
to
go.
get like we have to move all of the equipment and all the cars and everything, and I don't think there's a female truck driver.
I think there might.
Is there
I
one
keep
now?
saying I think there might be one now
There might
because
be
I
one.
think there is.
There might be one now,
I think
but
there is for.
Is it?
She's new this year.
Okay,
and I don't
maybe that's why I
personally know
don't.
her,
Maybe
but
that's why I don't know
I
her
do
either.
believe there is one now.
But I
So-
feel like that's a whole side of it too. That's like obviously an integral part for us to get from one race to another, and that's just there just hasn't been a presence there.
Or even like in the logistics planning is a huge part for us because we move a lot of things around the world and from track to track, and we like not even just things but parts and pieces and people that have to be, you know, here on Thursday and in this other place all the way across the country on, you know, next Tuesday. And, you know, planning those logistics is really complicated and probably an underappreciated job. And I'm sure there's some females in it, but it's not a traditional role that you might.
Not at all.
And I think that's something that a woman could really excel in.
Yeah, I love that we say like, oh, is there one that does this? And we keep saying, oh, I think there is one
there
now.
might be, yeah.
Because, I mean, truthfully, in the last several years, it has grown tremendously. The female presence in our paddock has grown tremendously. And I think for me, it's super cool to watch because I guess in the past you just felt privileged to be able to even participate. That felt like a privilege. And now that's not the case. You know, we all say that our industries and our sports are male dominated, which is interesting because there are still mostly males that are employed in our field as well. But as far as the dominating part goes, I think one thing I really like to bring up is we don't just participate anymore. We're not just here. Danielle, I'm sure you are the first female engineer that won the 12 Hours of Sebring race this year.
No, I think Lena beat me.
Oh, she did?
I think so.
Okay, well, she is one.
I'm probably the second one.
I would say you're the first female engineer that won a IndyCar championship, right?
Kate and I tied.
Kate and you tied, all right. But
So two at once.
like we don't just...
we did have two win
yeah.
at one time, which is kind of cool.
We're not just participating.
And Angela won 2 races last year as an engineer. I mean, I think we're not just here to participate anymore. We're here to win. So I think that's a really valid point to bring up. And I'm pretty sure one of us is going to win the Indianapolis 500 tomorrow. So
Yes, you are.
that's the plan.
Sorry. Okay, Barb.
In 1971, women were finally allowed on pit road. Back then, you had to prove yourself, 5 or 10 times as much to do any kind of work. Betty Rutherford was the first woman to do that for her husband, Johnny, in 1974. He won, and then almost every timing position became occupied by a woman. Has that number or ratio, do you feel, has that number decreased to where it's less, or is it still a case where you have to fight even harder than a man to get another spot in motorsports? Like, has it gotten better over the last 51 years is what I'm getting at, basically. And my apologies if y'all discussed this earlier. I had a transcript with a couple of things.
You're fine. It's definitely gotten better. As we mentioned earlier, I've been in the sport 20 years, and it was really hard in the beginning. I'm not going to lie on that one. And I didn't have any mentors to really lean on, so I kind of had to make my own path in there. There was a few that kind of were before me and trickled in there, but now the presence of females in the paddock is huge compared to what it was 20 years ago. It's definitely getting easier. I think it's made, I keep mentioning the past 10 years, it's made leaps and bounds in the last 10 years. So it's for sure changing.
I really think with the introduction of like motorsports programs, especially like what IUPUI is doing, and having those directed opportunities, it allows, you know, females to be a part of those programs and then have a direct way into the series. So I think it definitely opens a lot of doors that probably weren't open 51 years ago.
Yeah, in my opinion, like a lot of the lack of opportunity is a lack of interest, and that comes so much earlier than the point of having an opportunity to get a job, because it's the toys that your parents pick out for you when you're 3 and 4 years old. It's how people express your worth as a person. Like, do you tell them like, oh, you're so smart, you're so clever, or like, oh, you look so pretty in that dress? Like, your value as a person and how you like form your identity as a child. And over the last like probably 20 years, like this STEM education initiative and trying to make this more equitable for women and men, I'm starting to see those programs really come to fruition, and you're starting to see a lot more female presence in STEM programs in college. And so that when it comes time to, okay, you've graduated college and you're looking for an opportunity. Well, when I was in college, there were 9 or 10% females in the Purdue Mechanical Engineering program. So out of those, 9 or 10% female, out of, this pool of people, how many of those people do you think were interested in motorsports? Me, maybe one other person. Like, and it's, so that's why when you get to the point of, okay, we're hiring somebody, we've got 100 resumes here, like how many of those resumes are female? What are the chances that that female is the best qualified candidate out of those 100? Probably not great. And so when you increase the odds early on and you have, now you've got 20 great candidates out of 100, it makes it so much more probable that one of those 20 females is going to be the best qualified candidate out of those 100 people, and she's going to be the best person for that job. And you start to see more of these females in these roles because they're the best people for that job. And that's where I think the biggest change has come from, in my opinion.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us today and joining us here in Indianapolis Motor Speedway and bringing together both these two groups where, like I said, where they both work with cars, a little bit different, but this is something that brings us all together, getting women equality in pay and moving and evolving women forward. This is what it's all about, and everybody helping everybody. So thank you so much for joining us.